The first time I saw the New York skyline, it wasn't from a boat in the harbor or the window of a taxi. It was through the greasy, cracked windshield of a beat-up Ford Econoline van that smelled like diesel fumes and my brother's unwashed socks. My brother, Dimitri, was behind the wheel, his knuckles white as we merged onto the BQE, the skyline rising out of the smog like a promise made of steel and glass. We had just driven 23 hours straight from a town in the Midwest that we'd only chosen because a map showed it had a high concentration of Russian-speaking immigrants and cheap rent. We lasted 6 months there. 6 months of working in a warehouse that smelled of stale cardboard and broken dreams, stacking boxes until my spine screamed. But the money wasn't coming fast enough. We weren't building, we were just surviving. So we pointed the van east. To the city. To the place where, we were told, a man with nothing but his back and his will could become something. Dimitri and I, we came from a place where the word opportunity was a cruel joke. Our father had been a welder in a factory that closed before I turned 15. Our mother worked 2 jobs, her hands always red and cracked from cleaning chemicals, her eyes always tired. When I was 22 and Dimitri was 20, we pooled every ruble we had, sold our father's old Lada, and bought 2 one-way tickets to New York. We were chasing a ghost, the myth of the American dream. The version we heard back home was simple: work hard, keep your head down, and you'll be rewarded. What they didn't tell you was that the reward was measured in millimeters, not miles. That first year in Brighton Beach, we called it the grind. We shared a 1-bedroom apartment that was technically a converted storage closet. The radiator hissed like a trapped animal, and in the winter, we slept in the same bed just to share body heat. We didn't complain. Complaining was a luxury for people who had time to think about their feelings. We were on a schedule. Dimitri got a job as a framer on a construction crew in Manhattan, and I started as a dishwasher in a restaurant in the East Village. My hands were in water for 14 hours a day. I'd come home with my fingers pruned, smelling of bleach and old food, but I'd sit at the kitchen table and watch the head chef, a wiry Puerto Rican guy named Carlos, work the line. He moved with a rhythm, a grace. He didn't just cook, he commanded. I started staying late after my shift, washing his knives, sweeping his station, just to watch. One night, he threw me a raw potato and a peeler. "You gonna stare or you gonna learn?" he said. I peeled that potato. Then another. Then 100. Within 6 months, I was on the line. Dimitri, meanwhile, was a force of nature. He was taller than me, broader in the shoulders, with a smile that could disarm anyone. He moved up from framer to site foreman in a year because he wasn't afraid to work through lunch, through dinner, through the night if it meant finishing a job. We were different in that way. He was the fire, I was the water. He burned bright and loud, I just kept moving, steady, relentless. We sent money home every month, a wire transfer to our mother that made her cry every time she picked it up. We were doing it. We were actually doing it. After 2 years, I left the East Village kitchen and took a job as a sous chef at a new place opening in the financial district. The owner was a hedge fund guy with too much money and a passion for fusion cuisine. It was a risky venture, but it was my chance to step out of the shadow of other people's recipes. I worked 18-hour days, building the menu from the ground up. I sourced ingredients from upstate farms, I designed the plating, I hired the staff. It was my kitchen, even if my name wasn't on the door. The reviews came in 6 months after opening. The New York Times gave us 2 stars. The Village Voice called my lamb chops a revelation. I was 26 years old, and I had made it. It was at a tasting event for that restaurant that I saw her. Elena. She walked in with a group of people, art gallery owners, I later learned, and she was wearing a simple green dress that clung to her like water. She had dark hair pulled back from her face and eyes the color of dark honey. She wasn't the loudest in the room, but she was the one everyone wanted to talk to. I brought out a tasting plate personally, just to get close. She tasted my seared scallop with a fennel puree, closed her eyes for a second, and then looked at me. "This is the first thing I've had in this city that tastes like someone meant it," she said. That was it. I was gone. We dated for a year. It was the kind of romance that felt inevitable, like something written in a book. She was smart, she was cultured, she was from a family of doctors in Moscow who had lost everything in the 90s and rebuilt. She understood the immigrant hunger. She understood the pride of making something from nothing. When I asked her to marry me, I did it in the empty dining room of my restaurant, after closing time. I had the sous chef make her favorite dessert, a chocolate lava cake, and I put the ring inside the raspberry coulis. She cried, laughed, hit me on the chest, and said yes. Dmitri was my best man. At the wedding, he made a toast that brought the house down, talking about our first night in Brooklyn, sleeping on a mattress on the floor, sharing a single blanket. Look at us now, he said, raising his glass, his eyes lingering just a moment too long on Elena, who was glowing in her white dress. I saw it, but I dismissed it. It was pride, I told myself. He was proud of me. Proud of us. We bought a brownstone in Park Slope. It was a wreck, peeling wallpaper, outdated wiring, a garden that was just a patch of mud, but it was ours. I poured everything I had into it. Nights after my shifts, I'd come home and strip floorboards with Dmitri, who lived 10 minutes away with a girlfriend he never seemed to take seriously. We built that house back up, room by room. Within 3 years, we had 2 kids. A boy, Alexei, with my stubborn jaw, and a girl, Anya, with Elena's honey-colored eyes. I thought I had won. I thought I had beaten the system. The kid who came from nothing, who washed dishes in a basement, was now a head chef in Manhattan, a homeowner, a husband, a father. I had the full deck. I just didn't know one of the cards was already marked. It was a Tuesday when it started to unravel. A normal Tuesday. I had just finished a brutal lunch service. A food critic had been in, and I had to refire a steak 3 times because the new grill cook kept over-seasoning it. I was exhausted, but I had a family dinner to get home to. Elena was making her mother's borscht, a Thursday tradition she'd moved to Tuesday for some reason. I was walking out of the kitchen, my chef's coat still stained with paprika and lamb fat, when my phone buzzed. It was Dmitri. We need to talk. Meet me at the bar on 4th Avenue. I thought it was about money. He'd been talking about starting his own construction company, and he wanted me to be a silent partner. I texted back, "Can it wait? Family dinner." He replied immediately, "No. Now." I should have known then. Dmitri was many things, loud, ambitious, reckless, but he was never cryptic. He was a direct shot. A hammer to a nail. This vagueness was a red flag I was too tired to see. I walked into the bar, a dive with sticky floors and neon beer signs, and he was already sitting in a booth, a glass of whiskey in front of him. He didn't look at me when I sat down. He just stared at the amber liquid. I ordered a water. I was still in my chef whites, and the bartender gave me a look like I was about to ask for a job washing glasses. "What's going on?" I asked. He finally looked up. His eyes were red. Not from crying, but from that particular kind of exhaustion that comes from not sleeping. The kind I knew too well. "I have to tell you something," he said. His voice was low, a rumble. "And you're going to want to kill me. And I don't blame you. But I'm your brother, and I have to tell you." The air in the bar changed. It got thicker. The sound of the ancient jukebox playing some Springsteen song faded into a dull hum. I felt a cold drip start at the base of my skull and travel down my spine. I didn't ask what. I just waited. "It's Elena," he said. The name hung in the air. I thought of a million things. An accident. She was sick. The kids. God, the kids. I felt the terror of loss grip my throat. But then I saw his face. It wasn't the face of a man delivering bad news. It was the face of a man confessing. "What about Elena?" I asked. My voice was calm. Too calm. It was the calm of a cook whose station is on fire but still has 10 tickets on the rail. He drained his whiskey. It's been going on for 8 months, he said. He looked at me then, and I saw something I'd never seen in him before. Shame. When you were doing the late nights at the restaurant. When you were renovating the kitchen. She was lonely. And I was there. It took a second for the words to make sense. My brain refused to connect them. Elena. Dmitri. 8 months. They were two separate pillars of my life. The wife. The brother. To put them together was like trying to mix oil and water. But they had mixed. And the truth was a chemical reaction that was burning through everything I had built. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I didn't even hit him, though every fiber of my being wanted to grab the glass he just set down and smash it against his temple. I just stood up. The metal legs of the booth scraped against the floor. I looked at him, this man I had shared a bed with, a blanket, a dream with, and I felt nothing. A void where my heart used to be. Don't come to the house, I said. I didn't recognize my own voice. It was hollow. Don't call. Don't text. You are dead to me. I walked out into the cold Brooklyn night. I didn't go home. I couldn't. I walked for hours, from 4th Avenue down to the water, past the brownstones I'd helped build, past the bodegas where I'd bought coffee on my way to work, past the park where I'd pushed Alexei on the swings. Everything looked the same, but I was seeing it through a different pair of eyes. The eyes of a man who had just realized that the life he thought he had was a stage set, and the two lead actors had been performing a different play behind his back. When I finally walked into the house at 3 a.m., Elena was sitting on the couch. She wasn't asleep. She wasn't in her pajamas. She was fully dressed, a suitcase by the door. She didn't look guilty. She looked resolved. That was the worst part. She had already made peace with it. While I was walking the streets of Brooklyn, trying to piece my life together, she had already moved on in her mind. He told you, she said. It wasn't a question. 8 months? I said. My voice cracked on the word 8. It wasn't supposed to happen, she said. The classic line. The script she was reading from. Get out, I said. I pointed to the door. My hand was shaking. I'm not just going to leave, she said, standing up. She was shorter than me, but in that moment, she seemed to grow. This is my home too. This is my life too. You threw it away, I said. For him. He saw me, she said, and her voice was ice. When you were working, you didn't see me. You saw your restaurant. Your recipes. Your reputation. Dmitri, he was there. I didn't have a response to that. Maybe she was right. Maybe I was married to the work. But I never cheated. I never lied. I never betrayed. I just pointed to the door again. She walked past me, grabbed the suitcase, and called a car. As the door closed behind her, I slid down the wall and sat on the cold floor of the hallway. I was alone. The house was silent. And in that silence, I could hear the clock ticking. The clock was counting down to the next blow, the one I didn't even see coming. The next morning, I woke up on the hallway floor with a kink in my neck and a fury in my chest that I thought would burn the house down around me. I went upstairs to check on the kids. They were still asleep, Alexei clutching a stuffed dinosaur, Anya with her thumb in her mouth. I sat on the edge of Alexei's bed for a long time, just watching them breathe. These two small humans were the only untainted things left in my world. I swore to myself, right there, that I would protect them. I didn't know yet that in the state of New York, protecting your children and keeping them are two very different things. Elena was gone for 3 days. I assumed she was with Dmitri, though I didn't want to picture it. I assumed there would be a conversation, a negotiation. We'd been married for 5 years. We had assets, a house, a life. I figured we'd sit down, divide it, and I'd keep the kids because, well, she was the one who left. She was the one who had an affair with my brother. The law, I thought, was just. It rewarded the righteous and punished the wicked. That was my first mistake. On the fourth day, I got served with divorce papers. I was at the restaurant, in my office, going over the inventory for the fish order, when a process server walked right past the hostess stand, through the dining room, and handed me a thick envelope. I opened it in my office, and my blood ran cold. It wasn't a simple divorce petition. It was a declaration of war. She was asking for full custody of the children. She was asking for the house. She was asking for the equity in the restaurant, which she claimed was a marital asset. She was asking for spousal support, child support, and my legal fees. She wanted to strip me down to nothing and leave me standing in the ashes. I hired a lawyer, a guy named Vince who was recommended by the restaurant owner. He was a decent man, a family lawyer from Staten Island who handled uncontested divorces and custody agreements. He looked at the papers, whistled, and said, "Who is her attorney?" I didn't know then. I found out at the first hearing. Her lawyer was a woman named Elizabeth Sterling. She was known in the New York family court system as the Hammer. She was the kind of lawyer who didn't just win cases, she annihilated the other party. She charged $1,000 an hour and was worth every penny. Elena, who had no income of her own, she had stopped working at the gallery after Anya was born, had somehow afforded Elizabeth Sterling. I knew where the money came from. Dmitri. He had probably taken out a second mortgage on his own place, or borrowed from the construction company he was building. He was investing in my destruction. The first hearing was a blur of legal jargon and pointed accusations. Sterling stood up in her tailored black suit, her gray hair pulled back in a severe bun, and painted me as an absent father, workaholic who cared more about his Michelin stars than his children. She pointed to my late nights, my weekends at the restaurant, my travel for food festivals. She painted Elena as the devoted mother, the heart of the home, who had been driven to seek comfort elsewhere because of my emotional neglect. She even had the audacity to frame the affair as a symptom of my failings, not the cause of the marriage's collapse. Vince tried to fight back, but he was a middleweight going up against a heavyweight champion. He was outclassed, outmaneuvered, and outgunned. The custody battle was the cruelest part. A court-appointed psychologist was brought in to evaluate both of us. I sat in a sterile office and answered questions for 3 hours while a man with a beard and a notepad tried to determine if I was fit to raise my own children. He asked about my work hours. He asked about my temper. He asked about the night I found out about the affair, and whether I had ever raised my voice to Elena. I was honest. I said I had been angry, that I had pointed to the door, but I had never threatened her. He nodded, scribbled something, and I knew, in that moment, that honesty was not the strategy. The temporary custody order was a gut punch. Because the children were young, because Elena had been the primary caregiver while I was building my career, and because of Sterling's relentless framing of me as an absentee father, the judge granted Elena temporary full custody. I was allowed supervised visitation. Supervised. I had to go to a facility in downtown Brooklyn, a sterile room with plastic toys and a two-way mirror, to see my own children. Alexei would run to me, wrapping his little arms around my legs, asking when he could come home. Anya would just sit in my lap, quiet, confused, her honey-colored eyes, Elena's eyes, looking up at me with a trust one felt I had already failed. The financial destruction came next. Sterling argued that my interest in the restaurant, which was valued at just over $1 million, was a marital asset because the business had grown during the marriage. I had started as a dishwasher before we met, but I had become a partner after we were married. The timing was everything. She argued that Elena was entitled to half of that value. She also argued for the house in Park Slope, which had tripled in value since we bought it. And she argued for spousal support that was calculated to last for years. Vince advised me to settle. "She's going to take you to the cleaners, brother," he said in his office, loosening his tie. "Sterling is a shark. We can fight, but it'll cost you another $100,000 in legal fees, and you'll probably end up in the same place." I felt the walls closing in. Every day, I went to work at the restaurant, my sanctuary, the place I had built with my own hands, and I smiled at guests, I tasted sauces, I led the team. But inside, I was hollow. I was losing my kids. I was losing my house. I was losing my money. And the two people who had done this to me, my wife and my brother, were out there, probably living in the house I had renovated, sleeping in the bed I had bought, laughing at the fool who had trusted them. The final divorce decree was a massacre. I lost the house. I lost 60% of the restaurant equity. I was ordered to pay spousal support for 4 years, and child support that amounted to nearly 30% of my adjusted income. I was left with a rental apartment in Bay Ridge, a bank account that was a fraction of what it had been, and supervised visitation with my children. I sat in that courtroom, wearing a suit I had bought for my wedding, and listened to the judge read the verdict. Elena sat on the other side, holding Dimitri's hand. He looked at me once. A flicker of something, remorse? Triumph, crossed his face, and then he looked away. He couldn't even look at me. He had taken my wife, my home, my children, my money, and he couldn't even look me in the eye. After the hearing, I walked out of the courthouse into the cold November rain. I didn't have an umbrella. I stood on the steps, letting the water soak through my suit, and I felt something shift inside me. It wasn't anger. Anger had burned out somewhere between the bar on 4th Avenue and the hallway floor. It wasn't despair. Despair was a luxury for people who had time to feel sorry for themselves. No, what I felt was a cold, clear resolve. It was the same feeling I had when I was washing dishes in the East Village, staring at Carlos, knowing I was meant for more. It was the same feeling I had when I drove that beat-up van into New York City with nothing but a brother and a dream. But now, the brother was gone, and the dream had been stolen. So I would build a new one. A bigger one. A better one. And this time, I would build it alone. I went back to the restaurant that night and I worked. I worked like I was possessed. I stayed after the last guest left, scrubbing the grout between the tiles with a toothbrush. I organized the walk-in cooler by color and expiration date. I rewrote the entire menu, stripping it down to its essentials, focusing on the flavors I had grown up with, the beets, the dill, the sour cream, the braised meats, but elevating them to an art form. The hedge fund owner noticed. He saw the fire in me, the manic energy. A few months later, he came to me with an opportunity. He was opening a new concept in the old Woolworth building. A high-end Russian-inspired steakhouse. He wanted me to be the executive chef and a full partner. Not a silent partner. A managing partner. I would have control, creative freedom, and a real stake in the business. The catch was, I had to put up some capital. I had just been gutted in the divorce. I didn't have capital. I had a rental apartment and a used car. But I remembered something my father used to say. He said, when you have nothing to lose. I sold the used car. I liquidated the small retirement account I had managed to hide from Sterling's claws. I borrowed money from Carlos, the old chef from the East Village, who was now running a catering company in Queens. He handed me a check for $20,000 without blinking. You're the best cook I ever taught, he said. Go make us proud. I put every cent I had, and every cent I could borrow, into that restaurant. It was a gamble. If it failed, I would be bankrupt. But if it succeeded... For the next 2 years, I lived and breathed that restaurant. I woke up at 4 a.m. to go to the meat market in Hunts Point, selecting the prime cuts myself. I designed a dry-aging room in the basement. I hired a team of immigrants, Ukrainians, Georgians, Uzbeks, who knew the flavors I was chasing. We built the menu together. We became a family. The restaurant opened to rave reviews. The New York Times gave us 3 stars. Eater named us the best new steakhouse in the city. The reservations were booked 6 months out. The hedge fund owner, a man named Marcus, saw the potential and expanded our partnership. Within 3 years, we opened 2 more locations, one in Midtown and one in Williamsburg. I was no longer just a chef. I was a restaurateur. I was a brand. During those years, the supervised visits with my children became unsupervised. Then they became weekend visits. Then they became half the summer. The court had seen the stability I was building, the success, the home I had created for them. Elena, meanwhile, had moved in with Dmitri, but their relationship was fraying. I heard whispers from mutual friends. Dmitri's construction business had hit a rough patch, he was drinking too much, they were fighting constantly. The money he had poured into Sterling's legal fees was gone, and the house in Park Slope, which Elena had kept, was falling into disrepair. She had tried to maintain it, but the boiler broke, the roof leaked, and she didn't have the money, or the man, to fix it. Dmitri, it turned out, was a builder, not a maintainer. He was great at starting things, terrible at finishing them. I didn't gloat. I didn't reach out. I just kept building. I bought a new apartment in a high-rise in downtown Brooklyn, with a view of the bridge and a room for each of the kids. I filled it with art, with books, with the things I had always wanted but never had time for. I started running every morning, shedding the stress weight I had gained during the divorce. I bought new suits, custom-made, Italian wool, the kind that fit like a second skin. I wasn't the same man who had walked out of that courthouse in the rain. That man had been a victim. This man was a victor in waiting. I didn't know when or how, but I knew the day would come when I would see them again. Elena and Dmitri. And when that day came, I wanted to be standing on solid ground, while they were standing on quicksand. That day came on a Saturday afternoon in October. The leaves were turning, the air was crisp, and I had just finished a lunch service at the flagship restaurant. I was sitting in a booth by the window, wearing a charcoal gray Brioni suit, a white shirt, no tie. I was sipping a glass of sparkling water with a wedge of lemon, looking out at the street, watching the city move. I was at peace. For the first time in years, I was completely, utterly at peace. And then the door opened. They walked in like they owned the place. Elena, in a designer dress that looked like it had seen better days, the hem was slightly frayed, the color was a season out of date, with her hair dyed a shade of blonde that was too harsh for her complexion. Dmitri, behind her, wearing a blazer that was too tight across the shoulders, his face red from what looked like a liquid lunch. And the kids. Alexei, now 10, tall for his age, with my jaw and my stubborn set to his mouth. Anya, 7, her hair in braids, clutching a tablet to her chest like a shield. I watched them from the booth. They didn't see me at first. The hostess was seating them at a table near the window, a prime spot overlooking the street. Elena was complaining about the light, asking to be moved. Dmitri was telling her to sit down, his voice carrying across the dining room. It was a familiar tension. The friction of a marriage built on a foundation of betrayal and debt. I stayed where I was. I didn't wave. I didn't call out. I just watched. I wanted to see them. I wanted to see the people who had torn my life apart, not through the lens of anger or grief, but through the clear, cold light of my own success. And what I saw was ordinary. They were just two people. Flawed, aging, uncomfortable in their own skin. The glamour had faded. The romance of the forbidden affair had curdled into the mundane reality of unpaid bills and unspoken resentments. I felt a wave of something that surprised me. It wasn't satisfaction. It was pity. They had burned down my house to build a shelter for themselves, and they had built it out of matchsticks. Elena ordered a bottle of wine. A Bordeaux that was on our reserve list. It was $400. She didn't even look at the price. Dmitri was on his phone, scrolling, ignoring her. The kids were quiet. Alexei was staring out the window, and Anya was drawing on her tablet. I watched them for 20 minutes. I watched the appetizers arrive, the beet salad, the caviar blini. I watched Elena eat with the precision of someone who was pretending to enjoy a meal she couldn't afford. I watched Dmitri order a second bottle. And then, I saw Elena's eyes sweep the room. They landed on me. For a moment, she didn't recognize me. I had changed. I was leaner, sharper, dressed in clothes that cost more than her monthly rent. But then her eyes widened. She recognized me. She nudged Dmitri, who looked up from his phone. He saw me. His face went through a series of contortions, surprise, discomfort, and then, a sneer. The old Dmitri. The one who never backed down, who always had to win. They whispered. Elena's face hardened. She was putting on her armor. I could see it from across the room. She was going to come over. She was going to try to wound me, to prove to herself that she had made the right choice, that I was still the same man she had left, just sitting in a nice suit in a restaurant he didn't own. She stood up. Dmitri followed, a smirk on his face. The kids stayed at the table, unaware. They walked over to my booth. The dining room was half full, a Saturday afternoon crowd of well-dressed couples and families celebrating birthdays. Elena stopped at the edge of my table. She looked down at me, her eyes scanning my suit, my watch, my glass of water. Well, well, she said, her voice loud enough for the nearby tables to hear. Look at you. Sitting here all alone. Drinking water in a fancy restaurant like you're somebody. She laughed, a sharp, brittle sound. Still the same old workaholic. No wife, no family, just sitting by yourself in a nice suit pretending you matter. Dmitri chuckled, a low, mocking sound. Hey, little brother, he said, using the old nickname. They let you in here dressed like that? Or did you save up all year to rent that suit for one afternoon? He leaned against the back of a chair, his posture aggressive, trying to loom over me. You know, I heard this place is impossible to get into. Must have pulled some strings. Or maybe you just showed up and begged for a table near the window so you could feel important. Elena joined in, her eyes glinting. It's sad, really. You think this suit, this restaurant, this water, you think it makes up for losing everything? You lost your wife. You lost your kids. You lost your house. And now you sit here, alone, pretending you're successful when we all know you're just the same dishwasher you always were. She was good. I'll give her that. She knew exactly where to strike. She wanted me to crumble, to get angry, to make a scene. She wanted to see the old me, the tired chef with the stained coat, the man she had betrayed. She wanted to reduce me to that, so she could walk away feeling superior. A few diners were looking now. A woman at the next table had stopped her fork halfway to her mouth. The room was holding its breath, waiting to see what the man in the charcoal suit would do. I set down my glass of water. I placed it carefully on the white tablecloth, aligning it with the edge of the table. I looked up at them. Not with anger. Not with hurt. With a calm, quiet certainty that I had earned through every hour of labor, every sleepless night, every potato peeled, every menu rewritten, every dollar clawed back from the abyss. I stood up. I'm 6 feet tall, but in that suit, with the posture of a man who has nothing to prove, I felt taller. I looked at Elena first. Her eyes flickered with uncertainty. Then I looked at Dmitri. The smirk was starting to fade. I reached into the inside pocket of my jacket. I didn't pull out a wallet. I pulled out a key card. A black key card with the restaurant's logo, a stylized bear holding a fork, embossed in gold. I held it up, letting the light catch it. This, I said, my voice low but clear, carrying across the silent dining room, is my restaurant. The silence that followed was not a normal silence. It was the kind of silence that happens when a room full of people collectively stops breathing. Elena's face went from smug to blank. Dmitri's smirk vanished, replaced by a look of disbelief. He looked around the restaurant, at the decor, the lighting, the staff in their crisp uniforms, and I could see the calculation happening behind his eyes. He was trying to reconcile the man he had betrayed with the man standing before him. You see that bar? I continued, gesturing to the mahogany bar along the far wall. I designed it. I sourced the wood from a supplier in Vermont. Those steaks you're eating? I select them myself at 5 a.m., 3 days a week. That Bordeaux you're drinking? I chose it from a list of 200. I built this place. I own this place. And you, I looked at Elena, you walked in here to try to humiliate me, not knowing that you were sitting in the house I built. The house I built after you burned the other one down. Elena's face was pale now. Her hands were shaking. The brittle confidence had shattered, and underneath was a woman who had just realized she had made a catastrophic miscalculation. She looked at Dmitri, looking for support, but Dmitri was staring at the floor. He was a builder, but he was looking at something I had built that was far grander than anything he had ever constructed, and he had no claim to it. No part in it. It was mine. Completely, utterly, unequivocally mine. You think you took everything from me, I said, stepping closer to them, my voice still calm. You took my wife. You took my house. You took my money. You even tried to take my children. But you forgot something. You forgot who I am. I tapped my chest with the key card. I came to this country with nothing. I washed dishes. I slept on a mattress on the floor. And I built a life. You tore it down, and I built another one. A better one. A bigger one. And this time, you don't get a single brick. A sound came from Elena's throat. It was half a sob, half a scream. The composure she had walked in with was gone. The elegant ex-wife was now a woman on the verge of a public meltdown. You can't do this, she stammered. The children, you think you can just buy them with this place? The children, I said, and my voice hardened for the first time, are in my apartment 3 blocks away, on weekends, in a home I made for them. They have their own rooms. They have a garden. They have a father who has never lied to them. And you, I looked at Dmitri, you were my blood. You were the only family I had in this country. And you chose her over me. You chose the betrayal. So now, you get to live with the consequences. You get to look at this restaurant every time you walk down this street and know that the man you tried to destroy built it without you. Dmitri finally looked up. His face was red, but not with anger. It was the red of humiliation. This isn't over, he muttered, but his voice had no force. It was the empty threat of a man who had already lost. I looked past them, to the table where Alexei and Anya were sitting, watching. Alexei had a strange look on his face, a mix of fear and pride. Anya was just staring, her big eyes wide. I made a decision in that moment. It was a decision I had been building toward for years, but I hadn't known it until now. I looked back at Elena. Her mascara was running. She was trembling. The woman who had walked into my restaurant to humiliate me was now falling apart in front of an audience of strangers. I felt no joy in it. But I felt no pity anymore either. You're right about one thing, I said, my voice dropping to a near whisper. This isn't over. I turned to face the whole dining room, but my words were for her. You took me for everything. You used a shark of a lawyer to strip me bare. You thought you had broken me. But you just made me stronger. You thought you could replace me with my brother, and you found out that he's good at starting things, but he's terrible at finishing them. Well, I finish things. I reached out and took the key card, holding it up one more time. This restaurant is one of 3. I own them all. I have a portfolio, a team, a life. And now, I'm coming for the only thing you have left that's mine. Elena's eyes went wide. She knew what was coming. I gestured to the table where Alexei and Anya Saturday, my children, I said. You've had them. You've used them as leverage, as a weapon, as a shield. But not anymore. I'm going to hire the best family law attorney in this city. Not a middleweight like Vince. I'm going to hire the heavyweight. I'm going to hire the lawyer that makes Elizabeth Sterling look like a public defender. And I am going to sue for full custody. A gasp from Elena. Dmitri grabbed her arm, trying to steady her, but she shook him off. I'm going to walk into that courtroom with 3 successful businesses, a home in their school district, and a record of consistent, stable parenting. And you, I said, looking at her, then at Dmitri, are going to walk in with a history of adultery, a financial house of cards, and a relationship that was built on a lie. The judge is going to look at you, and then they're going to look at me, and they're going to see who was the builder and who was the thief. Elena let out a wail. It was a raw, animal sound. She collapsed against Dmitri, who was standing frozen, his face a mask of shock. The diners were no longer pretending not to watch. The waitstaff had gathered near the kitchen door, watching their boss deliver the final blow. I took a step back. I smoothed my tie. I adjusted my cuffs. I looked at them one last time. Elena was crying, her carefully constructed world crumbling around her. Dmitri was holding her, but his eyes were vacant, the look of a man who had just realized that he had bet on the wrong horse. Now, I said, picking up my glass of water. I took a slow, deliberate sip. I'm going to finish my water. And then I'm going to go pick up my children from their mother. And I'm going to take them to their home. My home. The one I built. I sat back down in the booth. I placed the key card on the table. I didn't look at them again. I heard Elena's heels clicking on the floor as she turned, dragging Dmitri with her. I heard the sound of their table being vacated, the clatter of the half-eaten caviar blini, the snap of Dmitri's credit card being handed to the waiter. I heard the door to the restaurant open and close. The silence that followed was different. It was the silence of a room that had just witnessed a reckoning. A few seconds later, the sommelier came over to my table. He was a young guy, French, who had been with me since day one. He poured me another glass of sparkling water without being asked. "Chef," he said, his voice low. "Are you all right?" I looked out the window. On the street below, I could see Elena and Dmitri standing on the sidewalk, arguing. She was pointing at him, her face twisted in fury. He was trying to hail a cab, his shoulders hunched. They looked small from up here. Insignificant. I smiled. It wasn't a smile of triumph. It was the smile of a man who had finished a long, hard journey and was finally, truly home. "I'm better than all right," I said. I picked up my glass and raised it to the window, to the city beyond, to the life I had built from the ashes of the one they had burned. "I'm just getting started." I took a sip of water. It was cold, crisp, perfect. And outside, the city kept moving. The cabs honked. The people walked. The world turned. But in that moment, I was still. I was a man who had lost everything, who had built it back better, who had faced his demons in a room full of strangers, and who had won. Not because I was lucky, or because I was cruel, but because I was relentless. Because I was an immigrant. And an immigrant knows that the only way to survive is to keep building, no matter how many times they tear it down. I sat in that restaurant for another hour. I talked to the staff. I tasted a new sauce the sous chef was working on. I approved the wine order for the next week. And then I walked out into the October afternoon, into the golden light, and I went to pick up my children. They were waiting for me, as they always would be. And I was waiting for them. I was finally, fully, unbreakably there.